I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Science Gateways Community Institute for those of you who may not already know about us. We are funded by the National Science Foundation to provide services and resources to people who are building gateways, and we do that in three main areas. One way is that we provide support for building and running gateways. That includes hands-on development support, so people who are building gateways up to 25% of their time over a period of months. We also have consultants who can provide advice about business planning and usability and marketing, cybersecurity, and so forth, all geared around gateways. And then we also have a catalog for promoting or discovering gateways. So it's a great way to find out also about software tools that you may need to have to incorporate into your gateway project. Our second area is education and training, like this webinar. We also offer an intensive one-week program that's called Gateway Focus Week, and it's offered twice a year. And that is also a selection of topics focused on taking your gateway to the next level as you're conceiving or building a gateway and understanding your audience and how to make your gateway very successful. We have a variety of student-focused programs as well, including internships. We welcome organizations who would like to have an intern. And we also have a coding institute. Our annual conference, which we just had last September and is coming up next year in the DC area. It will likely be we're about to announce, but mid to late October. Great opportunity to hear interesting speakers, connect with other people, and of course we have a website. And then finally, a big part of what we are is about building a community and providing a network. So to that end, we have partners who can support gateways in ways that we don't. The affiliates program are software projects that will be happy to support gateways interested in using their software. And then check out our website for these various resources like our news and blog, and join the community forum, which is a Google group for posting questions to the community in general. So that is the sort of three pillars, I guess you could say, of our organization. You can find out more about that all at sciencegateways.org. And then finally, I just want to ask if you get a moment, if you could take a moment to give us feedback at the end of this webinar about how you enjoyed it and how useful it was for you. It really doesn't take very long at all, but more importantly, we really find it helpful if you mention topics that you'd like to hear more about. So there is an open text option for giving us feedback in that way. So with that, I'm going to hand this off to our presenter today, who is Dan Katz. Dan carries many titles at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, including Assistant Director for Scientific Software and Applications at NCSA, as well as being in computer science, electrical, computer engineering, and iSchool there. We had the pleasure also of working with him as our program officer when SGCI was in the very baby years of getting started. And so he has a lot to say that is relevant and understands some of the issues around software sustainability as it affects both gateways and other kinds of software. So with that, welcome to Dan Katz.
Okay, thank you very much. So I have to agree that there's lots of interesting things that I could talk about, but what I actually am going to talk about is the effort that we're going through to conceptualize a different institute to the Science Gateways Institute that we're calling URSSI, the U.S. Research Software Sustainability Institute. And so because of that, I'm going to talk about what this institute might do and how we're planning it. And I'm not actually going to give a whole lot of specific guidance on sustainability at this point, but more talk to you about how this institute would be able to support sustainability in the future if it's funded and if it comes into being. So I should start by saying that this is a collaborative project with 5 co-PIs who are all here, as well as a bunch of other people who will show up on a slide in a few slides. So we're talking about research software, and we define research software as software that's developed and used for the purpose of research. It's the software that generates processes and analyzes results within the scholarly process. So this is not something like Microsoft Word, although that certainly could be used for some portion of activities, but that's not really research software. We care about research software for a few different reasons, and we can look at these in three different categories. One is to look at funding. And so if we look at funding, and we look at NSF in particular, we can find that NSF over an 11-year period made 19,000 awards for $10 billion with project abstracts that topically included software. And the chart here is just showing which divisions and directorates those awards were made to, but often many of them are collaborative, so this isn't exactly complete, but it at least gives you some sense of where NSF is investing money in software. This is about 20% of the overall NSF research budget during this period. If we look at DOE, there are 3 project areas within the exascale computing project, and 2 of those are primarily research software, application development, which is application software, and software, which is more middleware and things below the application. Paul Messina, a couple of years ago, described ECP as a 7-year project with a cost range of $3.5 billion to $5.7 billion. So here DOE is spending something on the order of $4 billion, likely, on software. So software is important, as we see from funding. We can also look at how papers that describe research talk about software. A very quick survey of 40 papers in Nature over a 3-month period found that 32 of these explicitly mentioned software. They mentioned an average of 6.5 different pieces of software packages per paper, and the vast majority of these are research software. In addition, if you look at the top 100 most cited papers, 6 of the top 13 are software papers, and the vast majority of this top 100 are either methods or software papers that describe the methods or the software that allows people to do research. The last thing that we can do is to talk to the researchers themselves. And so there have been 2 surveys done that I'm aware of. One was a survey of UK Russell Group academics in 2014, and Russell Group is kind of the equivalent of R1 universities in the US. And the other was a survey that we did of National Postdoc Association folks in 2017. We asked them a series of questions and recorded their answers, and we found that over 90% of the surveyed folks use research software. About 2/3 say that research is not possible without software, that their research specifically is not possible without software. And about 1/4 say that their research would be possible without research software, but it would be harder. And finally, we found that over half of the faculty and staff and about 28% of the postdocs develop their own software as part of their research. So again, so through these 3 things, I think the message that I'm trying to get across is that that software is really essential to research at this point. Science gateways are part of research software in a few different ways. One is that we can think about the Science Gateway frameworks and tools, and so the people that develop and maintain those frameworks and tools really are research software developers and maintainers. Another thing is that we can think about the Science Gateways themselves that are built on top of these frameworks and tools, and so the Science Gateway builders are also research software developers and maintainers. And then the third thing is that many of the gateways have a method that user-contributed elements can be brought into them, like tools on a Hub Zero platform, for example. And so the Science Gateway teams then are supporting policies and practices that are intended to make others more likely to contribute elements to Science Gateways. And so those others then are people that are also basically building software, maintaining it, but doing it through a gateway as opposed to necessarily directly. So having said that, why is sustainability something that we care about? And first, what is sustainability? And so there's 3 different definitions that I'm going to give. The first is the capacity of the software to endure. The second is that the software will continue to be available in the future on new platforms meeting new needs. And the third is that is a set of practices that are both technical and non-technical that allow software to continue to operate as expected in the future. The reason that these things are important is that software will collapse if it's not actively maintained. Software bugs are found, new features are needed, new platforms arise. This is in addition to the fact just that the underlying things under the software, the libraries, the operating systems, and platforms are changing. And so for all these reasons, it is important that people are actively involved in continuing to develop and maintain software. A lot of software is developed specifically for research by researchers. And these researchers often are experts in their discipline, but they don't necessarily often know software best practices, either for development or maintenance. And even more, researchers aren't rewarded for these activities for developing and maintaining software in academia, with some exceptions. And then finally, another issue is that developers don't match the diversity of our overall society or of the user communities. And so we are picking people to develop and maintain software out of a much smaller pool than we need to, and we're not taking advantage of all the human resources that we could in this area. So having said that there's all these problems, I also want to talk about a success. So there are a number of barriers that prevent recognition and career success for research software developers and maintainers, as I've said. Fernando Perez is an exception, and I want to use Fernando kind of as a highlight of where we would like to get to and what we would like to see become more common. So Fernando was an untenured research scientist working in neuroscience specifically, but in computational research more broadly. On the side, as he was doing his research, he co-developed the IPython and Project Jupyter projects with a team of like-minded folks. And over time, it turned out that the software had a lot more impact than the traditional scientific outputs he was producing, the neuroscience papers, for example. And this has evolved into the Jupyter ecosystem that is very widely used, very broad at this point. It's received a number of high-profile awards. And because of all these activities, Fernando has now moved into a fast-track tenured position at Berkeley in the Department of Statistics. And so this is, again, is a rare example of somebody that is primarily involved in building software, but has been rewarded for their software activities with a permanent position in academia. And so this is the thing that we would like to see happen more often again. So in order to try to make this happen and to fix some of these other problems, the Project URSSI, the U.S. Research Software Sustainability Institute Conceptualization, is planning a U.S. Research Software Sustainability Institute. And the intent of this is to cut across a bunch of different existing activities that are funded by NSF and beyond, using software and building software, that we would like to directly and indirectly positively impact all software development and maintenance projects. We want to focus on the entire research software ecosystem, including three different things. First, people who create, maintain, and use research software. Second, the research software itself. And third, the field of research software, so people who do research about research software. What we would like to produce out of this activity that's ongoing is to create an eager, supportive, and inclusive community of people that want to participate in these activities, to deliver a concrete institution plan that's configured to offer valuable services, something that we can give to NSF and say, if we had money, this is what we would do, and these are the things that we think are needed and why. And then finally, to publish a survey and a set of associated data that demonstrates a community need for this activity. The team itself, as I mentioned, has 5 PIs. I'm going to put Science Gateway folks in bold, so that's Sandra in this case. We have a bunch of senior personnel that includes Suresh and Marlon and Mike. And then we also have an advisory committee that includes Nancy, who, I don't know, I guess is kind of still a SGCI person, although retired, but certainly still interested. The context of what we're working in then as well is this NSF Institutes space. And the way that I think about NSF Institutes is that they either focus on a technology and cut across disciplines, or they focus on a discipline and cut across technologies. And so we have the Science Gateways Institute, that's an example of a technology-focused institute. And we have MOLSI and molecular sciences and IRIS-HEP and high energy physics that are discipline-specific. We also have funded at the same time as us the Geospatial Software Institute Conceptualization and Geospatial Science. and the CFD-SI, or I think it's now just the FDSI, for fluid dynamics. So if we say these things exist, or in some format at least, conceptualizations or actual institutes, then we see URSSI potentially as filling in this background. So working for the disciplines where there isn't an institute and working in the technologies where there's not an institute, but not taking the place of any of those existing activities. So working with the Science Gateway folks, for example, and maybe taking things that work in Science Gateways and trying to apply those to other technologies, or working with things that are happening in high energy physics and trying to apply those to other disciplines. The activities that we've been going through fall into a few different categories as well. We are first trying to learn from the overall community. And the way that we're trying to learn from the most people is through a survey, which has gone out very widely, and I'll talk about it in a little bit. We also then try to learn from a smaller number of people, but in a more detailed way from a set of 4 to 5 workshops that we've done. And then we also try to look at a few different projects in a lot more detail, and we have some ethnographic studies that are looking at 3 projects, and again, I'll talk about that a little bit more later. Through these different learning activities, we want to iteratively build on our existing understanding of a challenge and continue to build that as we go through these different activities so that we can say, here are the things that are really important to developers and maintainers. And then we want to talk about what we've learned. And we're doing that through our website, through 33 blog posts that we've had so far. Actually, we've had 32 so far. We have another one that'll come out tomorrow. A set of articles that we've written, papers that we've given, and talks that we've given, including this talk. And the overall goal, again, of what we're really trying to do is to build community, to get people to agree that this is an important topic and that we need to work together on it and to come together and figure out how we're actually going to do that work. So to talk about the workshops that we've had had between 4 and 5, depending on how you look at it. The first workshop was a general workshop in an Unconference that we held in Berkeley. And and I should say that each workshop has a blog post that describes it, and so all the links are on the bottom, and these slides will be available after the webinar. It had 4 key themes. One was software itself, how software is developed, how it's made usable, and how people get credit for it. Another was training and workforce development. How do we build on existing models of training and workforce development, and how do we design new methods of instruction? People. So how do we sustain the careers of people who actually are the human infrastructure of scientific software? Specifically here, I talk about research software engineers, or RSEs, and this is a career path that has been developed in the UK, but is becoming popular now in the US as well. As a way for people in academia and outside of academia to find permanent positions in universities. And then finally, projects. So how do software projects themselves become sustainable? What are the organizational and institutional best practices that are needed to make that happen? We also presented a straw horse of what we thought an URSSI Institute could do. And we came up at that point with 5 different activities: development support, an incubator, training, policy, and community. And we tried to map each of those to whether it was going to support software, support people, support the community, which is really the research field. And all of those are intended to have science and research impact. And so we talked about this in the workshop, and we realized a couple of things. One is that development support is something that is very hard to understand how to do. If we imagine that there are somewhere between tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of software developers in the US, how would a small project support them? How would we decide how to do this, how to give out resources, people, or anything else? And so it seems like this is something that's very challenging, and that at the end of this workshop, we were very unsure of what to do with it. And the other was policy. And kind of similarly, one of the things we realized was that policy, both doing research about policy and then campaigns to actually make policy changes happen, was something that we could do more easily with limited resources that would have a larger impact on the community. So these led us as we were thinking about where we were going to go in future workshops. So the next workshop was in Chicago. It had themes that came out from the Unconference part of community building, again, career paths and institutional support for research software engineers, training and workforce development. And specifically, one thing that came out of this workshop was the idea that maybe URSSI would have a summer school. And the summer school would be intended for grad students, but those grad students, after they'd gone through the summer school, could come back in a future summer school, either as TAs or mentors or potentially as instructors over time. And then the fourth theme was sustainability and how it's related to some of these other factors that are also important, reproducibility, usability, and discoverability in particular. We also started talking at this point about the URSSI mission and vision, trying to think about what needed to be in those. And we iterated again on the straw horse that we had talked about on the previous slide and in the previous workshop. And in that straw horse iteration, we realized that we had completely missed an area, which was management, sustainability, and governance for the Institute itself. And we also talked about development again, and we still didn't come to any consensus and found it to still be very unclear how we would do anything because of the scaling issues. We also had good ideas for other elements that were captured in both the blog post as well as some of the Google Docs and GitHub repo, which are things that we're now going through in order to take those ideas and to turn them into a plan. We had a credit and metrics workshop that was in Santa Barbara. This included short talks about a bunch of different projects working in the credit and metrics space. And then we used this strategy kernel concept from Rumholt to plan what we could actually do in the area of credit and metrics. And so the strategy kernel idea, which is kind of interesting and was a good exercise to go through, is to initially think of a diagnosis, think of some problems that you have and some challenges, and to enumerate them. Then to think about guiding principles that are going to be used to address each of those problems. And then to think about coherent actions that follow the principles and actually have the promise of solving or addressing the problems. We mostly focused on areas that were in the policy area, on actions that were in the policy area, we discovered, although some of the actions turned out to be in the communities area, some things that could be done by fellows. There were a lot of different actions that came out because we ended up with a bunch of different problems we were trying to address. And we realized that it would take about $3 million a year to do all of the things that we were talking about just in the credit and metrics area. And this is ignoring the other 4 or 5 areas of URSSI. And so this led us to say that we can't do everything. We have to really be careful about choosing the things that are going to have the most impact over time. And the other thing that kind of comes out of this as a consequence is that these actions are meant to support credit specifically. That's how we were talking about them, but they also have to overlap other activities. And if we're doing a number of things that only support credit, that's probably less effective than if we can put some of these credit activities into things maybe that are related to training or incubators or some of the other potential URSSI activities. And then we had a workshop on incubators that was in College Park, Maryland. This had participants from a bunch of different existing incubator programs, so Apache Code for Science and Society, ESIP, eScience, Mozilla, and NumFocus, as well as software ecosystem researchers. And what we tried to look at there was how to support new and existing software projects that have to attract contributors and maintainers, they have to set up a governance model, they have to find and manage funding sources, and they have to determine development practices. And so we compared a bunch of the existing models of support and guidance in these different activities led by the participants, as well as other ones that we knew about. And we determined a model of project phases, which I'll show you on the next slide, and tried to map these existing activities into that. And we decided that something that maybe would make sense for URSSI to do would be to coordinate these different incubators and to try to fill the gaps between them. So just to show what the project stages looks like, this is from Sebastian Bethnal. I don't want to go into this in a lot of detail, but I do want to say that if we're thinking about an open community that's building research software, it often starts with a single code and a user, and eventually more people join the development team. You get to have more users. It starts to cross different institutions. Maybe eventually we get to a self-governing developer community. And then maybe at the end we can get to a self-sustaining organization. It's not clear that you necessarily want to go through all these stages for any given project. You might want to stop at some particular stage and say that that's the best way to continue this project. The other thing is to say that there's a different path as well, which is a commercialization path, which starts off the same but then leads off in a different direction. And this is also a very valid path to take, but it's not one that we're as interested in supporting in URSSI. So we likely will try to work with how projects move from some set of stages to another set of stages on the open community activity on the left. Again, if we look at the different incubator activities that exist now, a lot of them are focused on one or more of these transitions, but there's nothing that really focuses on all of them, and we do see some gaps in there that we think we can fill. So beyond the workshops, we also had a survey. We had about 1,200 responses, and there were a number of different findings from this, and I just want to highlight some kind of preliminary things that we think we're getting out of the survey, but we're still doing the analysis and still working on a publication about this. So the first one is that the people that responded talked about the software work that they wanted to do, and they almost uniformly had issues finding the time in order to do it due to other responsibilities. The development process as well is another aspect. The respondents found that the people-related aspects of development were harder than they should be. They thought the technical aspects of software development were reasonable, and they understood either the reasons they were difficult or they found them to be sufficiently easy. There was less peer code review than people thought there should be. The software development practices that people were concerned with felt that those were not well supported by the tools they were using. So there potentially are some tool gaps here that we can highlight. Version control was an issue. We found that many people are still copying files to another location, or they're just zipping the files and creating a backup as opposed to doing actual version control. A lot of people reported that they really don't have any training. And the reason for this is mostly because they didn't have time to take training, not the training wasn't available. And so this, one of the consequences of this is that maybe there should be more training that is asynchronous and not synchronous, so that people, when they do have any time, can work their way through things rather than having to dedicate time to go to a class or a 2-day seminar or a summer school. Another thing is that the respondents reported that funding and support, both nationally as well as institutionally, were insufficient for what they thought needed to be done in software. And then another issue was that the respondents felt that the performance reviews that they went through or that they participated in didn't value software contributions as much as they should. And then the final element that came out of the survey is that most projects don't have diversity plans. Even though many realize it's something that they should do, they just haven't actually gotten around to doing it yet. And this is something where potentially templates might help, or there could be some other answers that we could provide. In the ethnographic study area, there have been some observations and semi-structured interviews that have been done over about a 12-month period, looking at 3 different projects of different types, one in astronomy, one in bioengineering, and one in hydrology. And the intent of these is to produce case studies about how research software projects overcome challenges in recruiting contributors, building a governance model, seeking funding, and sharing credit. And having done all these different activities, then we had a final meeting in Chicago that was kind of a workshop and kind of not a workshop in different ways, because it wasn't intended to bring in any new information. It was intended to bring together the PIs and senior and personnel and advisory committee members and a few experts. And it was really a design workshop where we wanted to talk about all the previous work, what we learned from the workshops and from the initial ethnographic work and initial survey results, and to actually start outlining what an URSSI implementation plan would look like, to talk about partnerships and strategies that would fit into that plan, and to propose a potential URSSI structure and activity. And then finally, to think about what workforce and budget would be needed to actually make this happen. So this was our final workshop. So at this point, then I want to kind of talk about what we're doing in response to all these different inputs, but I first want to just pause and see if there are any questions from anybody, if there's anything on the chat or anything else that anybody wants to bring up.
No, no one has posted a question just yet, although I will pause and see if anyone does jump in with something. I had a question myself, couple questions. One was you went by that ethnographic study slide pretty quickly, and I was just wondering if you could talk a bit more about how you ended up choosing those particular projects and like just some more details because I barely had time to like take it all in, basically.
Yeah, so the reason I kind of went through it a little quickly is that we don't really have results from it, and so I didn't want to talk about it too much. But
Ah,
I can say that just really quickly that this is being done by Nick Weber at the University of Washington at the iSchool there. Um,
okay.
we all worked with him to talk about different projects and to talk about candidate projects, but then he and at least one student or postdoc, I don't remember which, have actually been going off and doing this work.
Mm-hmm.
And so the main things we wanted to do were to get projects that were of different size, projects
Mm-hmm.
that were of different scope, and projects that were of different disciplines, so that we could try to get as wide a range as we could of this very human intensive activity of actually sitting with these projects and trying to understand them.
Right. Oh, okay. That makes that's helpful. A couple questions have popped up, one which Sandra answered for you,
Okay.
but another one was John Paul asked, or I guess he goes by JP. I have a question about the people developer challenges that software projects have. Are these challenges um,
Somehow.
somehow unique to software related projects?
Yeah, so I think that they are to some extent, and I think a lot of this is related to, again, related to credit and evaluation. So this is something that depends, I think, on where you are. If you're in academia, there really just are not good career paths for people that are working in software, and the work that they do in software generally isn't very well recognized. And so that's really one of the primary things that we're trying to address. Whereas in national labs, for example, I don't think this is really an issue, and in companies, it's not an issue at all because people are brought in to do this job specifically. So I think that's one example. There certainly are other examples about um, like project management and things like that are not really specific to software. But then there are other things that are specific to software in terms of, in particular, in terms of community projects, about how you think of a pipeline of people that are users at the widest point, and then maybe you're reporting bugs and asking for features at a somewhat narrower point, and then maybe you're actually creating issues and maybe creating pull requests at a even narrower point, and then maybe become contributors and become maintainers then of a future project or a future version. So I think how people move through that kind of a pipeline is probably somewhat different in software than it is in a lot of other areas of research. Although there certainly are other community activities that are similar. Okay, so
Then,
let me go
then,
on and then yes.
sorry, this is Sandra. Only to add something, what we realized in one of the Chicago workshops is also that, yeah, usability specialists, reproducibility, as Dan mentioned it, that are also people with totally different, or can be totally different experts than in software development, but would be very beneficial for software projects. Like we talked with a lot of librarians about preservation and reproducibility only. Yeah, software projects have a lot of different experts also. Yeah, in in the life
Yes.
cycle.
Yep.
Sorry.
Yeah, so that's a good point that they're right. So when I've been talking about software, I've been talking about developers and maintainers, but there are a large number of other roles that are different than hands-on coding that are also important to software projects, from community managers to user interface people to a bunch of other things. So, yep, that's true.
And one other thing, Dan, I
Okay,
just
let
wanted to
me,
mention
yeah.
your sound got a little glitchy for a moment there in your last answer. So I'm wondering if maybe we should have you turn off your video just to minimize bandwidth, and you could just talk. Yeah,
Okay,
thanks.
I will try to do that and see. Okay.
Yeah, I hope.
Um,
Okay.
so, okay, so in terms of the planning that we're doing, we've been trying to come up with a mission and vision. And we did this by having the PIs come up with initial statements in late 2018. mission being the purpose for URSSI's existence, vision, what we're actually striving to achieve. And then we went through a process by which we asked participants at the workshop about what they thought potential goals and visions were that would be useful for an institute. We found institutes that had similar goals, and then we compared their mission and vision statements. There's a group that was facilitated by Neil Chu Hong that developed a set of drafts. These drafts were then presented at the final URSSI meeting, and then the group that Neil led and the PIs have refined final versions of the statements. And so what we've come up with at this point is that our mission is to improve the recognition, development, and use of software for a more sustainable research enterprise. We achieve this through collectively developing education, outreach, and software services that emphasize open, transparent, reproducible, and cooperative practices, and that URSSI then is an institute for software expertise as well as a social infrastructure that promotes an inclusive and diverse community of research software engineers, maintainers, contributors, and users. And the vision that we have is empowered people building better software, enabling exceptional research. So this is where we are now. I don't know if this will change or not, but at least for the planning purposes, this is what we're starting with in terms of thinking about how do we plan to actually do these things? What are the details that we need to make these happen? We also have a bunch of different planning assumptions that we've had to make. So one is that we're thinking about a 5-year institute with a potential 5-year extension, because this is what NSF has done in the past for institutes. We're thinking about a budget that's somewhere in the $3 to $5 million a year range. We believe that $3 million is a baseline, and that's the minimum that's needed to actually have a successful institute. And if we would have less than that, then an institute probably isn't the right model, and we should look at other models instead. But on top of that baseline, we're building in some higher cost and higher return activities. We're thinking of activities as a set of reinforcing but separable activities, potentially on different timelines. And we're doing this because there's demonstrated interest in supporting URSSI goals from private foundations and potential interest from other funding agencies. So we're trying to craft something that doesn't have to all be done at once, but could be done in pieces in some sense. We realize that we need to have a number of partners involved. Improved software sustainability is needed in all fields, and we certainly can't do everything. And there are certainly a lot of potential partners who have overlapping goals for which sustainable software is one of the things that they want to do. And then the last thing is the fact that we need to have some indirection here. We cannot directly work with the US software development community en masse. URSSI is very small, the community is very large, and so we need to work indirectly and to leverage other groups. So the high-level things that we're thinking about is that we should choose some initial targeted communities and efforts, focus on them for some period, and then move on to the next set. Again, not try to do everything at once. We need to work closely with partners in order to amplify our efforts, and we have to be very clever about using resources and attempt to achieve multiple outputs for each activity whenever possible. Because again, even though this amount of money seems like a large amount of money, when you start thinking about numbers of people, it ends up getting chewed up very, very quickly. We're thinking about trying to have impact in the end on scholarly research as a whole, on science, engineering, humanities, everything else. We want to do this, again, by improving research software, by empowering people, and by making contributions to the overall research software ecosystem. In software, what we would like to do is to improve the sustainability of software by developing and sharing good enough and best practices, including practices for testing, governance, codes of conduct, and continuous integration, documenting various sustainability models and providing guidance on how to choose between them for new and existing projects, and promoting communities and appropriate governance models for open source research software. And then finally, building models to make best use of transient developers, particularly students that come in and around for a while, but then leave and leave software behind. In terms of people, our main interest is improving careers, and we want to do this by promoting new career paths, by developing and promoting the use of research software usage and impact metrics for hiring and promotion, so people get evaluated on their software work. Promoting the publication of research software in the same way that we publish scientific results, developing and providing training so that people can grow and can do new things, and then finally encouraging a diverse set of participants to enter the field and decreasing structural and systematic barriers where we find them that make it difficult for people to have productive careers, particularly members of underrepresented groups. In terms of the research software ecosystem, we want to improve the understanding and functioning of the ecosystem by documenting the use of research software in research, by growing and participating in communities that study research software, in promoting an increased understanding of the importance of research software in research, by promoting software credit and citation mechanisms, and by studying methods to catalog and promote research software, and in addition, by supporting the use of research software in reproducibility. So what we're thinking about at this point is again, a 5-year project with 5 themes. The first theme is an incubator, and the intent of the incubator is to provide technology business planning, governance and licensing and usability advice so that project ideas can actually turn into small projects, and small projects can become larger sustainable projects. The second area is training. We want to develop quick start guides, training modules, and a summer school. And this is an example of a place where partnering is very important because the carpentries already exists and is doing training, and so that would be something that we would want to work with as much as possible, both contributing elements to the carpentries as well as working with carpenters, instructors, and likely supporting the train the trainers model that they have. Community is the third area. Community, we would want to support a set of diverse people and fellowships, and this is diverse both in being members of different groups as well as being members of different disciplines. Also supporting champions in potentially regional and disciplinary areas, and putting on workshops and an annual conference. And then finally, policy. And the idea of policy, again, is on one hand to do research and analysis, to gather data and understand policy needs and potential changes. And then on the second hand, the second side, advocacy. And that would be actually working to make those changes occur. And then underlying all these themes is actually the management, governance, and sustainability of the Institute itself. And this is driving URSSI, monitoring it, and acting on metrics and risks, bringing in community views and ideas, and planning for future support. So having said this, just to give a few different examples of how some activities might occur across these different areas. So one is that we have a new software project that comes into URSSI and wants to talk to us, and they want to take advantage of URSSI. So one thing that they could do would be to go to the incubator area and to do some project planning, either if it's brand new, what they should be doing to start, or maybe how they should be moving towards sustainability. We hope that the training activity is going to be providing trained staff and contributors that can help this project, and maybe training the staff or contributors of this project itself. In terms of community, we hope that the community area will be creating collaborators and colleagues that this project can talk to. And in terms of policy, we hope that the policy area will be supporting an institutional and funding culture that lets this project thrive. Another thing that we could look at is that we find some community needs that we were not aware of. And so those community needs maybe will turn into new topics that will go into an incubator activity. They might turn into new courses and modules that we will bring into training. They could be brought into new fellows, new topics for fellows, or new workshops that we're going to run to better understand those needs. Or they could be brought into policy, where we might actually study this need and think of an advocacy plan for a way to address it. And then the third thing that I want to talk about is fellows. So again, fellows are going to come into the community area, but fellows may be also helping to develop material in the incubator. They may be developing materials and training, or they may be customizing the material and training for their particular community. They may be providing outreach and engagement, contributing to the website, helping to run workshops or conferences. Or they may actually be performing the analysis or supporting the advocacy that's happening in the policy area. So having said that, and this is, I know this is all a little bit quick, it's a lot of things to try to go through in a fairly short period of time. I want to talk about then what we're thinking about for sustainability of the Institute itself. One is that we're thinking about how we could attract funding from other agencies and private foundations. And in particular, the Sloan Foundation has expressed a strong interest in this, and they have told us that they potentially could fund some of the activities that we're talking about. There's other private foundations that also work in this space that certainly have interest in the same types of activities, even if they haven't expressed this directly to URSSI. The Chan Zuckerberg Initiative and the Smith Family Foundation are two examples of this. And the Sloan Foundation is willing to bring these foundations together and to talk about how URSSI might be supported. And so we see this as one of the things that's going to help us in terms of both initial funding as well as sustainability in the long term. Another thing is that the Department of Energy has a related project called Ideas Productivity that's going to be ending around 2021. And so we see this as an opportunity potentially for DOE and NSF to work together to take some of the activities and ideas and take some of the activities that we're talking about in URSSI potentially and bring these together and do these collaboratively. We're also thinking about potentially how would we get institutional support from the institutions that are involved in this, or for other institutions that see URSSI as something that's going to help members of their institution. And maybe we would have some kind of membership fees for from partner institutions, including from industry. So maybe we have some industry sponsors of different types that would get some value out of URSSI. We also then could have partners who could take on part of our mission over time. So maybe some of our training activities as they become mature get handed off to the carpentries, or we support the carpentries, or maybe vice versa. This is, again, to be determined. And then the last thing is that maybe some of the services that we're talking about might have some kind of a cost recovery model. And maybe they would spin off from URSSI. So maybe the goal of URSSI is after 5 years or 10 years, then it turns into a bunch of spin-off projects that are all self-supported and the need for URSSI itself goes away. So these are all, again, different things that we're talking about as options here. Then I guess then want to kind of close by saying what we hope we'll get to in a 5-year period. And that's fundamentally, it's more science and engineering. But that's because we think that having people with better research software skills will lead to better research software. By having a better research software culture, we will provide better career paths for developers and maintainers. By having better career paths, we think there will be increased willingness to share software and to join software communities from people that are able to do that. And then finally, the better research software itself hopefully will allow researchers to focus on their research and to use the software that's being developed by others. So where we are now, we are planning to complete a written draft plan by December of 2019. I've given you some highlights of things that we're thinking about, but none of this is cast in stone yet, and even cast in stone is probably a wrong thing to say about a draft plan, but cast in Play-Doh, maybe, something. We would want to then support this to NSF and make it public, again, end of this year. We'll run a pilot summer school in December, and we're calling this a winter school because it's not in the summer, but it would be something that if we were funded, we would think about doing each summer in the future. And then we would gather feedback from NSF and the public on the draft plan and gather lessons from the winter school and use those to create a final plan by April of 2020. And then we would hope for NSF to offer us a chance, to propose and to work with other potential funders to try to see if there are elements of our plan that they want to support. So that's really where we are with URSSI at this point. If you're interested in getting involved, even though we've really finished a lot of the activities, you can certainly watch the webpage. You can join the mailing list. There's a form on the webpage that will help you do that. You can suggest or discuss topics that you think we should be doing. This is a way of providing feedback both on what I've presented, as well as a way of providing feedback on the draft plan that we'll have out next month. You can follow us on Twitter. You can write a blog for us if you think that there's something interesting that you have to contribute that we should try to highlight and that's relevant to sustainable software. Or if you see interesting blog posts, please let us know, and we're happy to cross-post things as well. This can be done on GitHub. You can see our GitHub repository, which has repositories for the website itself. If you think we should add something to the website, as well as for the workshops. And then finally, I urge you, if you think this is interesting, to talk to other people about it, including NSF. So if you have a program officer and you tell your program officer that you think that URSSI is going to be addressing topics that are relevant to your research, that will certainly help us make the case to NSF that what we're doing is important and is useful. And if you have any questions or want to suggest something or want to volunteer, you can email us at contact@ursi.us. And so with that, then I will take any other questions that have come up.
Well, thank you very much, Dan. I really appreciate your time and attention today. We have a couple of questions populating in the chat, and I believe that one of them from JP is really interested in different institutions. So I know you're primarily focused on NSF as the funder at the moment, but how about NIH, NASA, or other federal agencies?
Right. So I stopped sharing so I can actually look at the chat. So if there's any other things, hopefully I can see them as well. Yeah. So for JP, I think we're certainly interested in working with those other groups as well. I think we have less good context with those other groups at this point, I think, is one of the issues. We have, as you might have seen in the advisory committee and the senior personnel, we have fairly strong connections with some DOE activities and the DOE research software activities and NSF software activities are probably a little bit closer than some of these others, but we certainly would like to talk more with NIH and NASA and other agencies as well. FDA is certainly another one, and agriculture is another. So this is definitely something that's of interest. We just, I think, are not sure how to start some of these conversations because of who we know at this point. So if there are suggestions from anybody about people that we should talk to, if this seems like this would be interesting to somebody else, we're very happy to go off and learn about that and then go talk to them.
Well, perfect. Maybe give folks a few more moments to add in a couple of questions, but I have one from Catherine that I'd like to share, if you don't mind.
Okay. And sorry, and just before that, just looking back at the chat, I was just going to answer Joe's question that as you probably saw in the end, the fact that we're going to create this draft plan that we'll send to NSF in December means that in theory, if NSF liked this, they could start writing a solicitation that could come out in 3 months, and there could be another 3 months to respond to it, and there could be another 6 months before they do a review. So the earliest possible would be the end of 2020, but much more likely it would be somewhere in 2021 if they do accept this and decide that they want to do something in this area. Sorry, go ahead.
All right, no, that's great. Well, I know Catherine was interested specifically in the survey, what sorts of training did people want to have? And is it something like how they should be coding, engineering best practices such as version control, or something else?
I think it's really, I would say it's really all of those and more. So again, I think it's both best practices and good enough practices. I really like that term that I think maybe came from Greg Wilson, but I'm not sure. About how do we in practice do things that are better than what we're doing now. And so that's in things that are related to software engineering. In particular, the relevant parts of software engineering that apply reasonably well to scientific software. Testing, continuous integration, development practices, coding standards in some cases, software review, peer review of software, pair programming. I mean, I think there's a lot there, but then beyond the actual development, things related to the community aspects. So community management, for example, encouraging people to join communities, things like how to write a code of conduct, what models somebody should look for, how do you enforce a code of conduct, deal with problematic behavior, how do you encourage good behavior, how do you encourage people to write helpful issues and to write pull requests that you can merge as opposed to having to iterate on a lot of times. So I think there's a variety of different things. For Marlon's question, this was a conceptualization, but are there any specific outcomes for the area we've identified? I think the survey itself, I think, will be a specific outcome that'll make some recommendations. I think the blog posts about the different workshops make some recommendations, but I think primarily the plan you could think of as an outcome that'll be recommendations for areas. And even if those are not funded, we are, I think, doing an analysis of those areas and coming up with ideas of what we think are the right ways to address them. So I don't know if that's exactly what you meant, Marlon, or if there's something else. Okay.
Looks like it worked. Perfect. Any additional questions for Dan? Well, if not, I know that Dan has shared the contact information to reach out to URSSI, and additionally has some great ways to stay connected and see how this project continues to evolve. Thank you again, Dan. Truly a great talk today and very informative. It's great to see a lot of attention being held towards those missing gaps between our grid. So fantastic.
Okay, thanks very much.